Lower your voice when you talk to me. That was my brother. At his own daughter's engagement party, the fork Adam was lifting to his mouth stopped 3 inches from his lips. A retired Master Chief Petty Officer named Walter Briggs set his bourbon down on the linen tablecloth without a sound. 81 years old. He had been quiet the whole evening. He had not spoken my name out loud since 2007. He couldn't back then. He had no voice to speak with. I wish I could tell you that moment felt like vindication. It didn't. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that 31 years of being told to lower your voice will leave in a woman's chest. 4 hours earlier, I had been sitting in my car on a side street in the Old Village neighborhood of Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, engine running, trying to decide whether to walk through that door at all. I had been retired from the United States Navy for 2 years and 3 months. I had 19 pairs of shoes in a closet that had once held only 1 pair of black low quarters. I had a right knee that could feel a front coming in before the weather app on my phone bothered to tell me. And I had a brother who had side-decided, somewhere between his middle baseball trophies and his second mortgage, that I was the wrong kind of Holloway. I cut the engine, adjusted the strap on the gift bag, walked toward the house. The driveway was laid in old Charleston brick that had gone the soft red of weather and salt. Daniel had a thing about brick. He had told me once, on a different visit, that it cost more than concrete and held its value better. He talked about everything that way. As an investment. A palmetto stood on either side of the front walk. The wreath on the door was already up for the holidays, even though it was the first Saturday in October. Through the bay window, I could see people moving in the warm light. The chandelier in the dining room was lit. Strings drifted out faintly when somebody cracked the side door to let the dog out. A Carolina wren was singing in the live oak that overhung the driveway. 3 sharp notes, a pause, 3 more. The way they do all year in the Low Country, like a clock that never stops. I had spent 32 years in uniform, learning how to read a room before walking into it. The habit did not switch off when I took the uniform off. I noticed 2 exits. I counted 4 cars I recognized and 7 I didn't. I checked my reflection in the side mirror without meaning to. Hair pulled back. Light makeup I'd had to relearn how to use after retirement. A navy blouse I had bought, because Rebecca said it brought out my eyes, and that didn't quite feel like mine yet. My name is Margaret Holloway. People who have known me a long time call me Maggie. The men I served with called me ma'am. The men I operated on called me whatever they could manage to say in the first hour after they woke up. Some of them couldn't say anything at all. I'd grown up in Charleston, on the downtown side of the Cooper River, in a house my father bought in 1971 when he came home from his last contract at the shipyard. Howard Holloway was a marine engineer. He built ships from the inside out, and he trusted machinery more than he trusted people. He had 2 children. My brother Daniel came first. I came 8 years later, when my mother thought she could not have another. My father did not understand me, but I think he loved me harder than he loved anyone else. That was the thing Daniel could not forgive. I had said yes a month ago when Rebecca first called me about the engagement. She had wanted to do the engagement party at our father's old beach house at Folly Beach before the family sold it, but Daniel had said no, he wanted it at his place. So that was where we were. Daniel's place, Daniel's terms. I had not been back inside Daniel's house in 5 years. The last time was the reception after Howard's funeral, in the spring of 2019. We had buried him on a Thursday. Daniel had said the eulogy, because he was the older one, and because Carol said it would look right. He had talked for 9 minutes about a man neither of us actually had access to anymore by the end. Then, we had come back to this same dining room and eaten cold cuts off paper plates, and Daniel had stood with a beer in his hand by the kitchen island, surrounded by the partners from his firm, and said, loud enough for me to hear, well, at least Dad knew which one of us he could leave the business to. There wasn't a business. Howard had retired from the shipyard at 68 with a defined benefit pension and a fishing boat he never used. Daniel had said it anyway, because it sounded right to him. I had not cried at the reception. I had cried 2 days later, in my car, in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter on Coleman Boulevard, holding a rotisserie chicken I had no plan to eat. That was the thing about my father. I had 30 years of letters from him. He wrote me in pen, every Christmas and every Navy birthday, with his small, slanted engineer's handwriting, and he always signed them the same way. Proud of you, kid. Just like that. 2 words and a comma. He never said it to my face. He could not seem to find the air for it. But he could write it down. I had every one of those letters in a cigar box on the shelf of my hall closet, in the order he had sent them. And I knew which one was about which thing. And I knew the names of the men on the other side of certain letters where he wrote, "Sorry to hear about Lieutenant Hayes. Your mother says he was one of yours." Daniel never knew about the letters. That was the part that hurt. Not that our father was unfair. He wasn't. He was equally inarticulate to both of us. But Daniel had decided in some private courtroom of his own that I had taken something from him, and he had been billing me for it ever since. I sat for one more breath in the car. The wren kept singing. My knee told me it was going to rain after midnight. I picked up the bag with the engagement gift in it. A glass paperweight I'd had a man on King Street etch with the date of Rebecca and Adam's first meeting, which Rebecca had told me about in a long phone call last spring because she still told me things. And I walked up the brick path to the door. Daniel opened it himself. "Mags," he said. "Not Margaret. Not Captain." He looked at the bag in my hand and gave a half smile. "You didn't have to bring anything. We're doing the gifts at the wedding." "I know," I said. "It's not a gift. It's a piece of glass." He let me in. The smell hit me first. Brisket. Daniel did Texas-style brisket every chance he got, even though we were 8 blocks from the harbor in a city that already knew what to do with meat, because he had read a magazine article about a pitmaster in Austin in 2014 and decided that was now part of his personality. The whole downstairs smelled like smoked salt and brown sugar and something sweet baking in the oven that I would later find out was Carol's Bourbon pecan pie. Carol came to the doorway from the kitchen with a glass of white wine in one hand and a dish towel in the other. She saw me and her face did the small adjustment it always did. Polite. Practiced. The smile of a woman who had been hosting people she did not particularly want in her house for 30 years. "Margaret, I'm so glad you made it. Let me take your coat." She took my coat, not the bag. She had already glanced at the bag and decided it didn't need handling. "How was the drive?" 18 minutes, I said. "Same as always." "Right, of course." Rebecca came down the stairs then. She was wearing a soft green dress that I had helped her pick out at a shop on East Bay Street the previous month. She crossed the foyer at a near run, hugged me before I had time to set the bag down, and said into my shoulder, "Thank you for coming." I held her a second longer than was polite by Carol's standards. "I told you I would." "I know, thank you." She pulled back and her eyes were a little wet. She wiped them with the back of her hand and laughed at herself. 24 years old and already better than both of her parents combined. I do not say that lightly. "Come meet Adam's family," she said, and tugged me by the elbow into the living room. The living room had been cleared of its usual furniture and a long table set up along the back wall with white linen, and the silver chargers Carol had inherited from her mother. Around the table, Adam's family was clustered with mine in that loose, awkward way that engagement parties always have. I caught faces I knew. Cousins, neighbors, Daniel's senior partner Robert Whitaker from the firm, and a number of faces I didn't. Daniel was already mid-sentence with a group near the bar he had set up on the sideboard. He glanced over, raised his glass an inch toward me, and went back to what he was saying. I caught the tail of it. "My sister Mags, who does something for the government we're not supposed to ask about. Don't worry, she's harmless." 2 of the men he was talking to laughed. One of them, a man I'd never seen before, with the kind of soft hands that had never touched a wrench, turned and looked at me with a smile that was meant to be friendly, but was already pre-filtered through what Daniel had told him. That was the first one. "I have heard worse. In worse places I let it pass." Rebecca was watching my face. She squeezed my elbow once. "Ignore him," she said quietly. "Adam's grandparents are over here. Come." She led me through the room. I shook hands with Adam's father, a soft-spoken man in his late 50s who did something with marine insurance. I met Adam's mother, who had been a public school teacher in Somerville for 31 years. I met Adam himself. Tall, quiet, the kind of careful young man who looks at the woman he is going to marry like he is still surprised every time he turns his head. And then Rebecca said, "And this is Adam's grandfather, Mr. Briggs." The man sitting in the armchair by the bookcase looked up at me. Walter Briggs was 81 years old. He was small, the way men get small in their last decade, but his shoulders had stayed square. and his hands rested on the arms of the chair, the way you rest your hands on something you might need to push up from in a hurry. He had a glass of bourbon on the side table. His hair was white. His eyes were not. He looked at me for 2 full seconds before his mouth moved. "Ma'am," he said. Just that. I felt the room shift around me half an inch, the way a boat shifts when a wave comes in under it from the wrong side. I held out my hand. He took it. His grip was steady. He did not let go right away. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Briggs." He didn't say anything. He nodded. His wife, a soft-faced woman with white hair pinned up, was sitting in the chair next to him. She glanced at her husband, then at me, and her eyes did the same small recognition that his had done. She did not say anything either. "Mr. Briggs," Rebecca was saying. Aunt Mags was. "That's all right, sweetheart," I said. "I'm sure Mr. Briggs and I will have time to talk later." Walter nodded once. He let go of my hand. His wife reached for his glass and moved it half an inch closer to him. She did not look away from my face. We sat down for dinner at 7 sharp. Daniel did not say grace. Daniel did not believe in grace. He said a toast instead. He stood at the head of the table with a glass of bourbon in his hand. Not the regular bourbon. The good stuff. He had told me once, unprompted, that it cost $600 a bottle on the secondary market. He tapped the rim of it with a butter knife until the room went quiet. Friends, family, future in-laws. He smiled the smile he used in client meetings. I had seen it once on a deposition video Carol had played for me by mistake. "We are here tonight because my daughter Rebecca, who I am still convinced was just born last week, has somehow become old enough to marry the finest young man we could possibly have asked for." He looked at Adam. He looked at Rebecca. The room made the right warm noise. "I want to thank Adam's parents for raising a son who knew what he was doing when he picked our girl. I want to thank Carol for 31 years of putting up with me. And I want to thank the Holloway family, what's left of us, for being here." He turned his glass slightly toward me. "My sister Mags drove all the way over from Mount Pleasant tonight." "Which is what, Mags? 18 minutes? Big sacrifice." A few people laughed. Polite, uncertain. "She is the doctor in the family," Daniel said. "Just not the kind that makes the family any money." Bigger laugh this time. From his end of the table. I kept my face still. I had a 30-year career of keeping my face still. Across the table, Rebecca was looking at her plate. Adam was looking at Rebecca, and Walter Briggs, 2 seats down on the same side as me, did not laugh. He set his fork down on the edge of his plate and looked at Daniel for a long moment, and then looked back at his bourbon. That was the second one. Dinner moved. Plates passed. Brisket and low country boil, and Carol's collards with the smoked turkey neck cooked in. Conversations broke into smaller ones. The man with the soft hands across from me, his name turned out to be Tom something, in private equity, asked me what I had done in the Navy, which is the question civilians always ask, and which has no good answer. "Surgery mostly," I said. "Oh, neat." He was already looking around for someone more interesting, like ear, nose, throat. "Trauma. Cool, cool." His eyes drifted to Daniel. I let him drift. A few minutes later, Carol asked me from her end of the table what I had been up to in retirement. I had a story ready. I had been writing case notes for a paper I was co-authoring with a former colleague, Dr. Helen Vasquez, on tourniquet protocols. The paper was about how the small windlass device my generation had standardized, the kind small enough to fit in a thigh pocket of a uniform, had brought the survival rate in our 2 longest wars up from roughly 3 out of 4 to better than 9 out of 10. The data was the result of a lot of people working on a lot of pieces. I had been one of them. I was telling that story softly, the way you tell stories at dinner, when Daniel cut me off. "Carol," he said from his end of the table, "did you tell Mags about the rehearsal dinner venue? At the country club." "She's never been." Carol blinked. "Daniel, she was." Right. We can talk shop later." "Mags, you'll love it. It's right on the water." He turned back to Tom from private equity. That was the third one. I had been counting. I do that. It's a habit. There is a moment at a certain kind of dinner where you can feel the room starting to choose sides. Not openly. Nobody picks up a fork and bangs a glass. But the kindness becomes uneven. The people who do not know you start being warmer than your own family is being. The neighbor passes you the rolls before you ask. The future mother-in-law catches your eye and smiles a smile that is 1 degree too long. Caroline Briggs, Walter's wife, leaned across the table on her husband's other side and asked me in a deliberate, clear voice, "Captain Holloway, is it still Captain?" I never know how to address a person properly once she's retired. The whole table heard her. She had not chosen the volume by accident. I smiled at her. Maggie's fine, Mrs. Briggs. Well, I'm going to call you Captain anyway, she said. If you don't mind. I was raised by my father to use a person's earned title. I don't mind, ma'am. Walter set his bourbon down. Quietly. He looked at his wife. She nodded at him so small you would have missed it if you hadn't been a person who watched rooms for a living. At the head of the table, Daniel had heard her too. I could tell by the way his shoulder set. He poured himself another finger of the good bourbon. He took a long, slow sip. He set the glass down. He looked at me down the length of the linen, the chargers, the silver candlesticks Carol had inherited from her mother, and he said it. Not loud. Loud would have been forgivable. Loud as hot anger, Daniel was cold. Mags, he said, lower your voice when you talk to me. I had not raised my voice. I had not spoken at all. That was the fourth one, and it was the last one. The room did not freeze the way rooms do in movies. It did something quieter. The conversation thinned. Two voices kept going for half a sentence and then trailed off. Someone's wine glass made a small clink against a plate. A woman near the foot of the table, a cousin of Carol's I had met once, drew in a breath and held it, and then let it out very slowly and looked away. I felt my right knee remind me it was there. I was not going to answer Daniel. I had decided that an hour ago, on the drive over, the way I decided most things in my life. I had decided it the way I decided which patients to operate on first when there were too many of them on the floor. You let the worst injuries go second. The ones that are screaming are still breathing. You go to the quiet one first. Daniel was the quiet one. He was the one who had been bleeding for 30 years. He just did not know it. Rebecca did not know any of that. Rebecca only knew that her father had spoken to her aunt in a tone Rebecca had never heard him use in front of company. She set her own glass down. Her hand was shaking just enough that the wine moved a quarter inch up the side of the glass and came back down. Her phone, lying face up next to her plate, buzzed. She glanced down at it. The way you glance at a phone when you are sitting at dinner and you are not supposed to. A quick look. Then she froze. She looked again, her eyes came up, found mine, didn't find what she was looking for there, went to the phone, came back to me. Aunt Mags, she said. Honey. Her voice was soft. Why is your name on this? I did not know what she had just read. I had a guess. I had been preparing for a version of this guess for 4 years. Show me, I said. She turned the phone toward me. The screen was an email notification from her bank, the bank she had used for college. The text was short. Final payment processed. Auto payment relationship has been terminated by the source account, recipient account in good standing. Below that, in the routing line, partly obscured but legible, the source account had a name attached to it. 2 initials and a surname, M.J. Holloway. Daniel's voice came down the table. What is it? Rebecca did not answer him. Becca, what is it? She did not look at her father. She looked at me. There was a 30-year crack in the room running directly between us. Between the head of the table and the middle, between her father and her aunt. And Rebecca had just looked down and found that crack with her foot. Becca, Daniel said again, sharper now, hand me the phone. She didn't. Walter Briggs put his hands flat on the arms of his chair, the way he had been resting them earlier. He looked, for a half second, like a much younger man. Then he stood up. He was 81 years old. He stood up the way men of his generation stand up when something has to be said. Slowly, without theater. He picked up his glass of bourbon to steady the room, set it back down without taking a sip, and he looked at Daniel from where he stood and he said, in a voice that was not loud and not quiet, Mr. Holloway, you will lower your voice when you talk to her. The whole table heard it. Daniel blinked. He had not been expecting to be spoken to by an old man at a long table in his own house. His mouth opened and then closed. He almost laughed. I watched him decide not to. Excuse me, Daniel said. Walter did not repeat himself. He turned slightly so that his body was facing me instead of Daniel. Captain Holloway, ma'am, he said. May I say a few words? I had heard the phrase exactly that way exactly once in my life. Outside an airport hangar at Ramstein Air Base in 2008. Said by a different man, on a different night for a different reason. The cadence of it was Old Navy. It belonged to a generation that had learned to speak in a particular kind of room. I nodded. Please, Master Chief. The table heard the rank. A few faces I did not know turned all the way around. Folks, Walter said. He addressed the table now, not Daniel. I am an old man and I do not make speeches, so I will be quick. My name is Walter Briggs. I served in the United States Navy for 36 years. I was a Master Chief Petty Officer. In 2007, I was on a forward base in Anbar Province as a senior advisor when our convoy was hit by a roadside device, on the way back from a meeting we should not have been at. I was the front passenger seat. I was not the worst hurt. But I was hurt enough that when I woke up, I was at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, in Germany, and the lower half of my face did not work the way it was supposed to, and I could not say my own name out loud, much less anybody else's. He paused. He looked at me. The woman who put my face back together did 3 surgeries on me over 11 days. I never spoke to her. I was on a wire. I could not write, because my hands were bandaged. The last surgery, I was awake for the prep. The team was talking around me. The woman in charge, she leaned down and asked me, in a normal voice, like we were 2 people in a coffee shop, if I had anybody I wanted her to call when I came out. Walter's voice did not waver, but Caroline Briggs sitting next to him was looking down at her hands. I could not write, he said. I could not speak. So she handed me a Sharpie and she tore a strip off the paper that her sandwich was wrapped in. She had not finished her dinner, because she had been in the operating room for 14 hours. She held that strip down on the bed rail, and I wrote my wife's address on it. Just the address. I could not remember the phone number. I have not been able to remember a phone number since the explosion. To this day. He turned, slow as a turning ship, and he looked at Caroline. My wife has kept that piece of paper in her wallet since the day the chaplain handed it to her. 17 years next April. Caroline opened her purse. Her hands did not shake. She took out a small leather wallet, brown and worn at the edges. She opened it. From behind a card slot she removed a piece of paper the size of a candy bar wrapper, folded once. The edges were soft from being folded and unfolded. She held it out across the table, to Rebecca. "Sweetheart," she said, "will you read what is on the back?" Rebecca took the paper. Her hand was shaking. Now she turned it over. The writing on the back was small and careful and slightly slanted, in the way handwriting is when somebody has been taught penmanship in a Catholic elementary school and never forgot how. She read it out loud. "If he asks, tell him I told him the truth. M. Holloway, Captain Medical Corps, United States Navy." The table was completely quiet. Carol's hand went up to her mouth. Daniel did not move. I had not seen that piece of paper in 17 years. I had not known Caroline Briggs had it. I had not known her first name was Caroline until tonight. I have learned over the course of my career that some moments cannot be planned for. You can train for them. You can imagine them. You cannot make them line up. What I do on those nights is sit very still and let the moment do whatever it is going to do. I looked at Walter. He looked at me. He inclined his head a half inch. The way men of his generation tip a hat they are no longer wearing. I looked down at my plate, brisket collards, a roll I had not touched. "Mr. Briggs," I said, and my voice was very steady. "Thank you." He sat down then. Slowly, Caroline reached for his hand under the table. Reverend James McKinney was sitting across from Walter. He had been at this party for one reason. He was the Briggs family pastor at a small Episcopal church in West Ashley, and he had baptized Adam. He had been the quietest person in the room all evening. He set his napkin down beside his plate. He cleared his throat. He stood up. I do not know what made him do it. I do not know if he had recognized me when I walked in, or if it took until Caroline read the paper. I do not know. If he had been planning to say anything when he came tonight, he had probably not been. Episcopal priests in their late 60s do not usually invite themselves into other people's dinners. But he stood. "I will be even briefer than Walter," he said. "My church runs a small program in West Ashley for the widows and children of service members who did not come home from the last 2 wars. We have been running it 8 years. We have helped about 190 families. I have been the priest at that church the whole time. I do not know who has been writing the checks. The checks come from a foundation in Wilmington, Delaware, registered to a name I do not recognize, and they arrive on the first Monday of every January, and they are always for $40,000. He paused. In December of the first year, I wrote a thank you letter to the address the foundation listed. I asked for a name so I could acknowledge the donor properly. The letter that came back was 3 sentences long. It said, "No name, no acknowledgement. The work is the acknowledgement. It was signed some H." He looked at me mildly. He smiled a small priest smile. I have been wondering who MH was for 8 years. Tonight I have a guess, Captain. If I am wrong, please correct me. I did not correct him. He sat down. He picked up his water glass. He took a drink. There was a chair at the far end of the table. Robert Whitaker. Daniel's senior partner from the firm. The man Daniel had been pitching for the better part of a year. The reason for half of the men in suits in the living room. Robert had not eaten anything in 20 minutes. He had been holding a glass of bourbon, turning it in a small slow circle on the linen, and he had not been drinking it. He set the glass down now. He looked at Daniel, then at me. Captain Holloway, he said, my nephew Tommy was at Walter Reed. Tertiary referral 2011, multi-system blast injuries. 3 surgeons told my sister he would not see again. The 4th one told her that he might. The 4th one was you. He said it flat, like a man reading a deposition. He is a high school teacher in Mount Pleasant now. He sees fine. My sister told me about you for 2 years, and I never made the connection until Mr. Briggs stood up just now. He looked at Daniel for a long beat. Daniel, he said, we need to talk on Monday. Then he picked his glass back up. He drank. Daniel did not say anything. There was nothing he could have said. Carol stood up from her chair at the foot of the table. She did not look at her husband. She did not announce that she was leaving. She walked through the door into the kitchen, and a few seconds later I heard the back screen door open and close. And then nothing. Her car did not start. She had not driven anywhere. She had just gone outside to stand in her own yard. The room did not break apart. That was the strange thing about it. People did not get up and leave. The brisket was still on the table. The bourbon pecan pie was still in the oven. Adam set his fork down very carefully on the rim of his plate. Rebecca was still holding the piece of paper Caroline had handed her. She had not given it back yet. Conversations did not resume. They folded. People began to talk again, but smaller, 2 by 2, in voices that were soft and careful, and that took the temperature of the next sentence before letting it leave the mouth. The young woman across from me, a friend of Rebecca's from college, whose name I had already forgotten, leaned across the table and asked me, very simply, if she could bring me another glass of water. I said yes. She brought it. Rebecca got up and came around to my side of the table and sat down in the empty chair next to me that her mother had set for an aunt of Adam's who could not fly down from Wilmington. She did not say anything for a minute. She held the piece of paper in her hand and turned it over again. How long? She said finally. 4 years, I said. Fall semester of your freshman year through the last bill 3 weeks ago. How much, honey? How much, Aunt Mags? I told her. She nodded slowly. She did not cry. Rebecca had inherited my father's face, which was a face that did not do that easily. And Dad doesn't know. Your father knows that I paid the deposit on the dorm freshman year because his check bounced. He told you that the check bounced because the bank had made an error. The bank had not made an error. He told me in the parking lot of the Harris Teeter on Coleman that he would handle it from there. I told him I understood. I let him save face. The next bill came in October. I paid it. I have paid everyone since this. Why? Because you were going to Stanford, and your father was not going to be the reason you didn't. Rebecca did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, don't say that part out loud again tonight. I wasn't going to. She squeezed my forearm under the table. She got up. She walked the length of the dining room to where her father was still sitting, his fingers on his glass, looking at the candlestick in front of him like it had something to tell him. She stood in front of him. He had to look up. Did you know? She said. He did not answer. Daddy, did you know? He did not answer. She nodded once. She walked back toward the kitchen, toward where her mother had gone. Adam stood up and followed her without a word. I watched them go. Walter Briggs turned his head a 1/4 inch and looked at me. I looked back at him. He did not nod. He did not say anything. He just held my eyes for a moment and then looked away. Robert Whitaker did stand up then. He walked over to my chair. He put one hand on the back of it. He did not touch me. Captain Holloway, he said, in a voice low enough that the rest of the table only heard the murmur of it. I owe my sister a phone call I should have made 14 years ago. I am sorry it took tonight. I will not impose on this dinner any further. He walked to the foyer. He put on his coat. He went out the front door. I heard his car start in the driveway and back out and drive away. That was a $2.3 million engagement he had been pitching for 11 months. Robert had been within 2 weeks of signing the papers. I knew the number because Daniel had mentioned it 3 times at our father's headstone unveiling the previous spring. He had wanted me to know what he was almost worth. Robert did not sign on Monday. He did not sign at all. I learned that part later from Rebecca, who learned it from her mother, who learned it from a partner's wife at a charity luncheon in November. Daniel was passed over for the partnership track at his firm that same quarter. He did not lose his job, he just did not advance. The men who decide those things never explain themselves out loud. But Daniel had been counting on it. We all knew he had been counting on it. You can ruin a man without lifting a hand. You only have to be in the room when somebody else tells the truth he was hiding from. I did not do that to him. Robert did, Walt Waller did, Reverend McKinney did. I sat in my chair at the middle of a dining room table in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, on the first Saturday of October, and I let other people speak. Daniel got up after a few minutes and walked into the kitchen. The kitchen light was on. The bourbon pecan pie was burning. I could smell it from where I sat. He did not pull it out of the oven. He stood at the kitchen island and looked at his own granite countertop. For what I learned later was 19 minutes. Then he came back into the dining room, and he asked me, in a voice I had not heard him use since the night our father died, if he could talk to me alone in the garage. I said yes. The garage was attached to the house through a mudroom door that did not quite close right, and that Daniel had been meaning to fix for 9 years. He flipped the light switch. The fluorescents took their slow time coming on, the way old fluorescents do, ticking once and twice before they catch. The garage was clean, the way Daniel's garage was always clean. The 2 cars he and Carol drove had been pulled out earlier in the week for the party guests. In their place was a 1971 Ford F-100 he had been restoring since 2018, on jack stands, hood open, the radiator pulled out, and sitting on a moving blanket on the concrete. There was a beer fridge humming against the back wall. There was a calendar from a marine supply store hanging on a nail. The page was still showing September. He closed the mudroom door behind us. He did not look at me right away. He walked to the front of the truck and put his hand on the open hood, the way men do when they want a piece of metal between themselves and a person they have to say something to. "You set me up tonight," he said. I did not answer. "You knew that man would be here, Walter." "I didn't. You are lying, Daniel." He turned around. The fluorescence made his face look 10 years older than he was. His shirt collar was open at the throat. His tie was crooked. He had the look of a man who had skipped his last drink and was wishing he hadn't. "You always had to be better than everyone." I waited. "You always had to," he said. "Since we were kids, you had to take the harder thing. You had to leave the city. You had to wear the uniform. You had to keep the letters in a box that I knew you had and that he never gave me one of. He gave you 28 Christmases. I got 2 Hallmark cards he forgot to sign. I had not known about the cards. I have to say that because it matters. I had not known. Daniel, you think you have won something tonight. No! You came here in a navy blouse and a paperweight. And you knew. You knew. You knew the old Navy man was going to be in that chair. And you knew Robert was at this table. And you knew what would happen when Becca opened that email. I did not know about the email. Stop lying. I'm not. You always had to be. You decided I had to be. He stopped. The fluorescence ticked. You decided that for me, I said. When I was 17 years old. You came home from Clemson for Thanksgiving in 1985, and I told you I was going pre-med. And you laughed and said, "Don't embarrass the family." Dad heard you. He didn't say anything. Mom didn't say anything. And I made a decision that night at our kitchen table that I would never give either of them a reason to be embarrassed of me. I did not make that decision because of him. I made it because of you. He was breathing through his mouth now, the way he had as a kid when he was trying not to do something. Dad knew, I said. Don't. Dad knew. Every Christmas, every Navy birthday, he wrote it down. Don't. He never said it to either of us. I get that. He didn't know how. But he wrote it down for me because you had stopped asking by the time you were 19 years old, and I never stopped. That's the difference. That's the only difference. He didn't pick. You stopped showing up. I built a life, so did I. I built it here. I built it for him. He didn't want a life built for him, Daniel. He wanted a son who called on a Sunday. He looked at me. His chest moved once. His eyes were wet, but he was not going to let them spill, and I was not going to make him. I have watched men make harder decisions than this in worse rooms, and I did not get in their way then either. He set his jaw. You think you have won something, he said again. Quieter this time, almost to himself. I came to a party, I said. Now I am leaving one. I turned. I walked to the mudroom door. I opened it. I looked back once. He was still standing with his hand on the hood of a truck he had not finished, and was probably not going to. Tell Carol the pie is burning, I said. I went back through the house. Rebecca and Adam were sitting on the front steps in the cold. Rebecca looked up. I bent down. I kissed the top of her head the way I had since she was 3. Call me Tuesday, I said. Tuesday, Tuesday. I walked to my car. I drove home. The Ravenel Bridge was lit up against the dark water and I did not look at it. I had seen it 10,000 times. It rained the way my knee said it would at 2:17 Sunday morning. I sat on the porch of my house in Mount Pleasant at 6. The sky was the gray of seawater before the sun gets to it. The Wando River was a quarter mile through the live oaks behind my yard. There was a Carolina wren in the magnolia again. Maybe the same one, maybe a different one. I could not tell. The air smelled like wet pine straw and salt. My right knee hurt. It always hurt after the rain. A patient I had not been able to save in 2009 had grabbed me by that knee on the way down in the trauma bay at Bethesda, and I had torn something I did not get fixed for 2 more years. And the knee had not forgotten. I did not want it to. My phone was on the railing next to my coffee. It buzzed at 6:14. The text was from Rebecca, Aunt Mags. Can I come over? I typed back. Yes, anytime. I set the phone down. There are things I want to say here at the end of this story that I am going to try not to say. The temptation, when a person has been holding her tongue for 30 years, is to use the moment at the end to make a speech. I am not going to make a speech. I will say this. I did not want what happened that Saturday to happen the way it happened. I would have taken a smaller version of it. A version where Daniel asked me, in the kitchen, a real question. A version where my father had once told me out loud, with his actual voice in a room, the thing he wrote in pen 28 times. I did not get those versions. I got the version that came. People are comfortable with sacrifice when it stays invisible. The minute it shows up in a room, the air gets thin. That is not just a thing about my brother. That is a thing about the country I served and the family it came out of. The women who carry the bills in your family, the aunt, the sister, the cousin, the in-law you forgot to invite, they do not need a salute. They need you to not be surprised when you find out. My father wrote me 28 letters. I have them in a box on a shelf in my hall closet. I am going to give one of them to Rebecca on Tuesday. She is the one he would have given the rest to if I had let myself die before he did. That was the plan I had made when I was younger, and I am glad I outlived it. He signed every one of them the same way. Proud of you, kid. 2 words and a comma. I am going to leave it at that. Thank you for spending this evening with me. Take care of yourself, and of the people in your family who quietly take care of you. A note before you go. The realities behind the story you just heard are not invented. The way combat trauma medicine changed between Vietnam and our 2 longest wars. The survival rate that climbed from roughly 3 out of 4 to better than 9 out of 10 is part of the public record. So is the quiet hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, where a great deal of that work was done. So is the fact that women make up about 1 in 10 of this country's veteran population and use VA services at roughly half the rate the men do. The piece of paper Caroline Briggs kept in her wallet is invented. The reason a woman like her might keep one is not. If anything in tonight's story made you think about a woman in your own family who you suspect has been carrying more than she has told you, please do not ask her on a Saturday at dinner in front of company. Sit with her on a porch on a Sunday. If she is a veteran and she needs to talk to somebody tonight, the Veterans Crisis Line is reachable by dialing 988 and then pressing 1, and it is staffed 24 hours a day by people who understand the shape of what she might say. If you are looking after an older parent or aunt and you are starting to worry about how the bills are being handled, the Federal Eldercare Locator at 1-800-677-166 can connect you to local services in any state, free of charge. I am not a doctor, and I am not a lawyer. I am someone who wanted to tell a story about the women who walk into rooms and get asked which one of the men in the photograph is theirs. We all know one. Most of us have not asked her the right question yet.